For example, one of the things I was thinking about is I always love the story you tell about when you and Bernard moved to someplace and you wanted to spend money. He told you you couldn't spend any money. What city was that? And tell me that story again.
Well, it was Salt Lake City, but you need to know everything that went before.
Well, I think enough is to say we're really poor.
Well, but we weren't really
Oh,
poor.
okay.
We were military,
Uh-huh.
and so our income was at that. Remember, now everything has to be kept in context with the time, and this was in 1942. Would have been 1942, early 1942, because the Second World War broke out in December 7, 1941. Bernard went into service October 13, 1941. So when we left, we were married January 42, and then we left and went through that process, and so we were in Salt Lake City, okay, Kern County, and we had only the military income at that point. He was going to go overseas, and I wanted to look very nice. So I went into town and bought a dress, and the dress was $50. That was a lot of money. And I bought a pair of Dorsey pumps, which was a lot of money. And then I bought a pair of, white gloves, and which was a lot of money. And then Bernard had said something. I wasn't used to coming from a home where you had to account for, my mother used good sense, and it just never came up. You couldn't have sweetheart. It wasn't one of those things. So that was what I was used to. He was used to a more precise accounting of, it was just a different approach to money. And so he said to me, you can't, whatever it was, you can't, it was too much, something like that. So I deliberately went out, and we were married about 6 months, 6.5 months at that point. That's when I deliberately went into town and deliberately bought these things because he was going to leave and I wanted to look nice. I also wanted to make a point. And then had him come with me to pick them up. And so that took care of that. We never had a discussion about what I spent from that day forth, except if I bought him a present. Then there was a conversation. So that was it, period.
So that was before the time when you lived in the garage, right? That wasn't the garage.
No.
Where was the garage?
We were married January 18, 1942. And Bernard my mother said, do you have a place to live? Bernard said yes. And so he was stationed in Amarillo, Texas. It's easy to tell you. He was stationed in Amarillo, Texas in the Air Corps. And of course he didn't have a place to live. And so when we got there, we found a garage. You have to handle the digressions. It was a town of 18,000 before the war. The war came, it jumped literally in less than a year, far less than a year, to over 28,000, plus the military base. So everybody, as a patriotic duty, was supposed to make available any space they had, okay? And so they took these old houses like you would be used to in the East that were a complete shock to me, and they converted them into living quarters. So they took these, what was a roof, I guess, and they would, an upstairs porch or something, and they turned them into, quote, apartments. They also took the garages. Now, the garages were very narrow because at that time cars were narrow. So they split them in half, and instead of having a double, you now had a single garage. They then turned them into living quarters. So you had a bed that would, sliding, just a bed, and they put a bookshelf sort of over it, which was kind of used then. And they had a drop table here. So if you had the table up, you couldn't go through the table. The bed provided a seat for the table. And then at the length of this little garage, they had like maybe 3 feet, and they had, quote, a kitchen, you know, with a little sink, and then the bathroom right next to it. And that was the living quarter, and you paid $40-something a week for it, or a month. That was a month. In Louisiana, it was in Biloxi, it was $40 a week, but here it was about $40 a month. So that's where we lived. Well, then when my mother and father said they're going to come out and visit, you know, to be sure that he was treating me right, we had a fit. I said, if my mother sees me here, she's going to absolutely freak. So I went out looking for a place to live. And Phyllis and Jack were stationed there. Bernard and Jack were friends, except there was this wall of sorts, because Bernard was an officer, Jack was not. So it kind of had to be, you know, off limits type of thing. Anyhow, I went out and looked for this other apartment that Mother might be more satisfied with, and found this place that they had converted upstairs, you know, which was an outdoors, I can't even describe it, but you know what I'm talking about. So they had converted this place. When we found it, the first instant paint existed at that time. It was called Chemtone. And so we were painting it, and we painted the inside of this place, and we button tufted the furniture with stuff from the 10-cent store. They still had dime stores. And so Bernard and I were button tufting this thing with nails and doing all that stuff. And it worked out fine. Well, then my parents came in to visit, and they came and they saw, and they stayed 8 hours on the clock, and they didn't want to bother us, so they left.
And they came how far?
From Los Angeles to Amarillo, Texas, by train. Military train during war times, with the babies and the mothers and the soldiers going all directions. But they just wanted to be sure that Bernard wasn't beating me or something, I guess. And so that was it. They were there like about 8 hours, and we took them back to the train. And so that was the place in Amarillo. But in the meantime, we were transferred down to Biloxi, Mississippi, from Amarillo, Texas. Biloxi, Mississippi is an entomologist's paradise. Every bug in the universe is very happy living there. And there was, which base was down there? I can't remember the name of the base. But it was an air base, Air Force base, and so he was transferred there. And we could, of course, not find any place to live. So we went to this motel, which was under a spreading, wonderful oak tree, and we paid $40 a week for it, and our Bernard's pay was $150 a month. Okay, that was our income, and that wasn't going to work too well, because you couldn't even cook there, and nothing. So I went out looking for some place to live. It was also the time, just about the time I was a senior in college, housing developments were becoming reality, and I worked for one of the instructors who was involved with it. So I went out, found on the back bay of Biloxi, Mississippi, a housing development. The houses were $500, full price, and they came with nothing. A wall, 4 walls, a ceiling, a floor, nothing. And this is the back bay, you know what I mean, with the swamps, with the... So anyhow, we had nobody could give you wedding presents because there was nothing to buy. So they would give you money. So we had a little over $400, close to $500 in wedding presents. So Bernard, can't remember the name of that base. Anyhow, we asked my folks to send the money, and a very nice southern gentleman of the highest quality, whose name I do remember, Mr. Perisic, was the agent, and he assured us that if Bernard were transferred before a year, they would refund the money, and instead of charging $50 a month in payments, they would charge, you know, a back, you know what I mean, you know what I'm trying to say, and it would be $90 a month. So any way we did it, we couldn't come out as losers, and that was a guarantee. Well, the base was right here, and the house that we were looking at, and it was a new development, was right here. So Bernard could just go, and there he was, right in the base. And when he was OD, Officer of the Day, different than what it means today, when he was Officer of the Day, he could check on me, because he can just hop in a Jeep and come around and see that everything's okay and go on back. So that looked like a good thing. So we bought it. We bought it. And then we had to do something about living in it. So we ordered from the Sears catalog, $14.95. There's some things you don't forget. $14.95, a dining room set, a table and 4 chairs. And you had to put it together, of course, which was not his forte, but we managed somehow, got it together. And we had, we bought a bed, okay? But the bed never came, only the mattress came. Remember that? And DDT was another brand new thing. It was the wonder repellent of the history. And so we would get into bed, quote, the mattress, and then Bernard would take the little bottle of DDT and he'd walk around the edge of the mattress dribbling the DDT so the creatures wouldn't come to bed with us. And the bed never came as long as we were there. It never came. We'd always have to leave the light on in the closet, which was also a deterrent for the little creatures. Okay, and that worked out. We bought an ice box for $50. I came from Los Angeles and knew about ice box like I know about the dark side of the moon. And so, of course, you have to empty the drip pan. You folks from the East know that. So if you don't get to the drip pan exactly on time, you're in trouble. So the guys on the base just really, really liked Bernard. And they were good guys. You know, they weren't the kind that went flying around the wrong places. So they needed something to do. So one of the guys said, listen, Bernie, I'll come and, only they wouldn't call him Bernie, they'd call him Lieutenant. I will come and drill the hole so the water from the ice goes straight through underneath, because we're about that high from the ground or more. So that's what he did, and he put a pipe in there so we didn't have that problem. Then Bernard built a table, kitchen table with 4 legs of varying sizes, and we had that. And another guy who just loved the gardening thing, you know, came over and he got plants from the back bay and he did a little landscaping, and that worked out fine. Well, then we got a call or something from his mother, and telephone calls were also very difficult. And he got a call on the base, and she said she was coming to visit. Okay? So we picked her up on a Thursday night, and she loved wrestling matches. She really did. And we picked her up on a Thursday night and brought her home. Well, of course, before she came, we had to have someplace for her to sleep. So Bernard brought home an army cot, because he was in ordnance part of the time, and I guess that's what it would be called, and some old quilts that had been sterilized, you know, after the guys burned holes in it, and they were discards. So he brought those home, and we padded the little thing with it. And the 10-cent store, that's not true. In New Orleans, in Biloxi, I picked up the bus and went to New Orleans. And on Carondelet Street at that time, you had some stores. And in the store, among the stores, were some fabric shops. So I got some hand-blocked linen, beautiful print, for $1 a yard or something, and brought that home. And just to jump for a minute, we nailed, Bernard had brought home the discarded Venetian blinds and strung them together because the bay window was that big and the blinds were that big. So we had to do something. So we just nailed it onto the wall because you couldn't get the metal for the rods and they didn't have plastic and all that. So we just nailed it on with a little valance on top. So some of that went to make a skirt and a spread for the cot. And Bernard's mother was coming, and oh, there was another thing. At that time, oranges were packed in crates. Okay, so you had all these wonderful articles about how you could build furniture from and so we had 2 crates, and we stood them up, you know, vertically, and painted those and covered those. That was my job, doing that. So those were the nightstands. Same thing. Bernard's mother is coming, and so we have this room arranged, and you didn't use carpets over there. You just wouldn't dare because of the mold and the dampness and the bugs. Always the bugs. Those were your house guests all the time. And so you got these matted, these woven mats like you might use in the tropics, and that we had a carpet quote. We had one of those on the floor, and I think we had one in her room also. So we picked her up on a Thursday night, and we had a very nice evening, and then Friday morning and Friday night, Bernard arranged for us to go to the wrestling matches on the base. Okay? And we did, and we had a nice evening. We all went to bed, got up in the morning. Bernard went off to the base. At 10 o'clock, he came back. I'm being transferred. We have to hit the road by 7 o'clock that night. See, the doves are there. They make a nest there. So, food, everything was rationed at that time, and you had to have ration stamps. So my mother sent, because we had a market, Mother sent, she couldn't send food, so she sent the stamps. Well, I was used to living with the market, and my mother always had enough food in the house so that if 10 people dropped in 10 times within, she wouldn't have to go to the market, except for maybe milk and that sort of thing. So I was used to having a goodly supply. So when she sent the ration stamps, I bought, you know, put it. We had all that to sell, okay? So by 7 o'clock that Mr. Perisic honored his word, because we were there about 3 months, I think, something like that. Mr. Perisic sold the house, in effect taking it back. We had to pay that difference in rent. Everybody was very happy to buy the food because they didn't need stamps for it, so it was a blessing for them. What else? Bernard's dad wanted the hose for some reason, and something else, I can't remember. So we took that, packed the car. I didn't tell you how we got the car, but I'll tell you that in a minute. We packed the car. We got Bernard's mother packed. Now, she'd come in after a 12-hour or more journey on Thursday night. We're putting her back on the train, you know. So everything was sold. That was it. We were on the road before 7 o'clock that night.
Headed where?
Salt Lake City, Kern County. And we put her on the train, and Bernard tipped the porter lavishly because he said, take care of my mother. And those... and she was on her way back home, and we were up headed for Kern County, Utah. Now, gas was rationed also, okay. When we were married, my folks gave us their 1941 Oldsmobile because Bernard could get a ration allowance for gas, which was hard to do. But he did, and they had 2 cars, and I can't remember the rest of why they gave it to us. That's who they were. They gave us, even if it was hard for them. And so that's how we got the car. So we started driving, and we had to go back through Amarillo, Texas. Well, Phyllis and Jack were still living there. So we stayed with them overnight and then headed up to Kern County. We got there. Bernard had to go to the base. What happened then, I don't remember. I really don't remember that point. But you've heard us talk of Evelyn and Leon? Well, Leon's sister and brother-in-law lived in Salt Lake, so we got to visit with them. But that was very nice. Okay, well, Bernard didn't know how long he would be there because it was an everyday thing. They were shipping them out real fast, but you just didn't know. So we were there about 3 weeks, and then he got notice that he was going to ship out. He was headed for his APO in San Francisco. So I said, he said something about selling the car, and I said, no, I'll drive home. Well, I could have said I was going to go to China. You're not going to drive home alone. And there was some validity to that. The roads were different, the times were different, everything was different. The thing that was different, that was good, is that you could pick up any hitchhiker in the world and you didn't have to worry. That was very different. But he wasn't hearing any of it. So when we called my folks to tell them, they said, you stay where you are, we will come and get you because our car burned down in the garage. So we need the car. Okay, same story about traveling up to, traveling any place at that point. So they got on the train, they came up to Salt Lake. Remember, the times, the train, the mess, the money, and they came up, and Bernard had a 10-day pass. Got it? When they came up, he didn't have the pass. We thought he was going straight to San Francisco, to Hamilton Field. So we took him off of the train, and we went to a very nice hotel, the name of which I don't remember, and we said, he got a pass. Do you mind if? My parents were, as you've heard so many times, quite remarkable and wonderful sports, and they put their stuff in the car, and the 4 of us headed back home. And so we drove home. And then Bernard had to leave after. He had a 10-day pass, and then we put him on the train, and that was it. He stayed home.
What was it like to come back home and live with your parents and have Bernard gone for all the time
Well,
he
you
was
skipped an
overseas?
episode first, and then I'll tell you that, okay?
Come on down.
So then because this is he was very, real macho and real outgoing and real aggressive about everything. And so when he went back, he got up to San Francisco, and he realized he wasn't going to go out tomorrow. So he called me and he said, I don't know how long I'll be here, but why don't you come on up? So I said, I can't get up, because at that point, especially in Los Angeles, you couldn't, unless you were military, you couldn't move. You could walk, but that was about it. So Bernard said, stay where you are, I'll come down and get you. So he hopped a plane coming down here, and we took him off the plane. Daddy took me over to what was known as West part of airport. It's now part of LAX, but it was just a little dumb addition where the military would land. So Daddy took us over there. We got on the train to head back. Literally, took him off the plane. We got on the train. It took us 12 hours to get to San Francisco on the red eye. So we got up to San Francisco, and when we got there, there were some of the, high officers, ladies who were being hospitality people, and Bernard left me, and he dashed off because he had to be back, at duty. And this lady takes me who never had anybody pay any particular attention to my health, or I was always so healthy. She takes a look at me and she says, honey, you better come with me and lay down. And she took me up to the officer's house, and took me to bed. Well, I didn't know it, but I was having a miscarriage at the time. So there I was in bed. So I stayed there all day. Bernard came, picked me up, and we went racing around San Francisco. So we had a ball. So we were there about 3 days. Then he got notice he was shipping out. So he got on the whatever C something plane, put me on the bus to go down to pick up the train, something like that. I headed home and he headed out, and we didn't see each other for 24 months. Okay? So each time I expected him home, he went further down. All right. Now, what was your question?
What was it like after being married and gallivanting around and being independent and all that, to have to go back home with parents and have your husband gone for so long?
It wasn't that much of a change because, for one thing, my parents they were very wise, and they were, the answer is I don't know. It didn't seem to bother me. I missed him, but the rest of it, they were really very wise people. And the older I get, the more I realize how well they handled it. I had my own. It was just like going back to, to my same room. I started teaching and went to school with my father because the market was here and the school was here. So I would drop him and go on to school. And the hardest part was waiting for anything from Bernard, because sometimes you wouldn't get mail for 2-3 weeks, and you'd hear the news, so you knew the approximate place that he was, which wasn't a happy, fun place to be. But there's another episode when he shipped out and he first went to Hawaii. He was at Pearl Harbor. Okay? Now this is after Pearl had been attacked, don't forget. So again, we didn't know how long he'd be there. And they were short of teachers. So Bernard said, why don't you come over? And you can teach and we'll be together, because I'm going to be here. Okay? So I went racing around trying to get a way to get over there. And just about the time that I really would have made it, see, now that upset my parents, but they didn't say anything. Really quite remarkable. And just about the time I would have gotten over there, Bernard was shipped out. So that was a blessing, I guess. Could have been interesting, but I don't think was mature enough or sophisticated enough to deal with it then, had I been there alone. I don't know. Who knows?
So tell about the homecoming, when you finally was finished being overseas and came home.
You have to ask a question.
First of all, where was he overseas exactly?
He was in Hawaii. From Hawaii he went to Okinawa. From Okinawa he went to the Ryukis. And from the Ryukis he went to Atsugi, Japan.
When he
Guam. He was also in Guam.
When he got...
During a hot war.
Yeah.
When he got sent home was it the end of the war?
No. Not
so
quite.
When he got sent home, he still had more time in the military here before he was discharged?
No, I said that wrong. No, he was home in March, and they wanted him to go into to re-enlist, or he'd been straight into Korea if he'd have done that. That was only 5 years later. And if you remember any of this, Bernard, help. I was very apprehensive that he might be really different.
And was he?
I don't think so, but you see, we hadn't been married. Don't forget how different our courtship was, and we hadn't been married that long. I don't think so, but I can't really tell you. But we had a lot of, had I been more assertive, aggressive, we could have had some real problems, I think. But my nature isn't that.
When he came from overseas, was he discharged then? Or did he still have more time to do?
No, he was discharged.
Okay. So where'd you live?
We stayed with my folks for... Let's see, Bernard sent home money. He was a very good poker player, and he would always send the money home. Bernard, can you help in any way here? He was just a really good poker player, and he didn't like losing, of course, so he always stopped before he could really, and he'd send it home, and he sent home his check. It was assigned. So my folks wouldn't let me pay for anything, so I saved it all. And then I was working, I was teaching at Bellflower, and that's another experience. Anyway, so all that money was put away. Well, to buy a whole house was like, I don't know, $7,000 or something. So we had this money, when he came home, we had this money to put down. And this was, isn't that funny? I don't remember if it was a new house or not. But it was not too far from the store, and it was a nice little house, you know, if you can, you've seen pictures, I'm sure, of houses built in the 30s, these little, okay. $7,500 for a house was a nice house.
How did it work in those days about the mortgages? Could you put 10% down and finance the whole rest, or how did that work?
If you had mortgages, of course, you had to, and because it was the day of the housing project, you had a lot of, you know, a lot of help that you didn't have before. Not loans, but your mortgage availability was better, and he was a 4-year veteran. So that bought us something. And if you can ask me anything else about the money, the answer is, I didn't know then, and I don't know now. I didn't have the slightest idea what money was about. I just was very dumb, indulged. I don't know how else to say it. I just didn't know. And Bernard used to sit me down every month and say, now this is, you've got to know in case anything happens to me. So every month we'd go through this, and it would go over my head. But he felt better telling me. So, you know, it was a different me, a different he, a different time. Anyhow, we bought this cute little house, and I had a ball fixing up this cute little house with the, you know, crisscross full curtains and strictly feminine. That's all.
So how long after that did you have a baby?
Oh, he wanted a baby right away. So Ronnie was born almost, you know, not that long.
And how long did you stay living in that house?
Not very long.
And where'd you go?
Where did we go? We went to the Red Rooster Market. We bought that. Where in the heck was that? Down at where's Nutwood Avenue, Fullerton? It wasn't Fullerton. Maybe it was Santa Ana. We bought it with. We bought it. Period. The market. And those were the days when the market, you had a market, and there were departments in the market, which were subleased from the master lease. We had the master lease, we had the market. And
so you moved to a house down there? Or?
We bought a house down there. We bought a house down there, yeah. It was, again, a brand new tract. It was on Nutwood Avenue, which was not a main thoroughfare, which it is now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how old were your kids when you went back to work?
Ronnie was in the 8th grade and Alan was in the 1st grade. And only because of Mildred Loxon. Otherwise I wouldn't have done it.
How so?
Well, when Alan was in kindergarten, Lauren was in kindergarten. And Mildred and they were half day, you know, in the morning. And Mildred and I would sit and wait. Well, 2 more unlikely people to become friends probably never existed. She came from, you know, what, Pennsylvania, right outside the Amish country, with the cesspools and the cisterns and the, you know, all these other things, and she understood outhouses. You know, every time she opened her mouth, it was something that was totally foreign to me. But however, we waited for each other, and she had to get over her shock with me, and we became friends. And watching her with Lauren, and they were broke at the time. Walter was just starting. They had moved from Pennsylvania, and so they lived about 3 minutes from us. So she took Alan, and Ronnie would go there, you know, after he was an 8th grader. And my first interview for a job was in, you know, I'm losing names here. Funny how the older names, not Valencia, what's the other? Was Saugus. In Saugus, I said there was an interview for the primary grades. So I went to the interview, and Bernard was waiting for me. And these men said to me, everything was fine, and then they said to me, well, why do you want to teach the primary grades? And with the innocence of a child, I said, because then I'll be home in time for my children to get home from school. Needless to say, I did not get the job.